In the last couple of videos I watched, and they both started with hello folks. I don't know why. I don't ever start videos like that, or I definitely don't talk like that. So I figured I would just start it and then think of something witty to say. Something better than hello folks. No, we're gonna have to get right into it. Got nothing witty to say. So, folks. Hello, folks. Anyway, so we are going to dive into the third part of Does the Devil make me do it? In the first, we saw the Garden of Eden, the temptation, and the fall. Then, in the second video, we looked at the basic understanding of invocational and incantational evil, and whether when you give yourself over to Satan, then yes, he does make you do things. We shouldn't be surprised that the satanic do Satan's bidding willingly and even vicariously, and like a puppet, a sin-filled bag of bones puppet for Satan. But those who have faith in Christ, believe and are baptized, are saved, and of course we have an invocational and incantational understanding of Christ and the Christian Church. Today is going to be a more somber and a more sober look at, did the devil make me do it, or does the devil make me do it? Because we're going to look at the end. When we look at the end, we're going to look at it through the lens, or through two lenses. I don't know, I keep coming up with twos. It seems to be working out well. So unlike the beginning of this video, the two things is working out. First, we're going to look at it through the lines of C.S. Lewis in his book, The Screwtape Letters, particularly chapters 28 and 29. That's number one. We'll get to number two in a second. For those of you who do not know the Screwtape Letters are basically, it can be kind of confusing when you first start reading it, because the protagonists are actually the antagonists for us. So Wormwood and Screwtape. Screwtape is a senior ranking demon in hell, and Wormwood has been assigned a patient. One person who throughout his life, throughout the entire book, he is the patient of Wormwood. And so it's Wormwood's job to tempt, twist, and make him do things that would get him into hell. So the question, does the devil make me do it? Well, first of all, that the question by itself is a farce, because the devil by nature is not omnipresent, right? He's a fallen angel, so he's not everywhere. So if you think the devil is after you, that's a pretty bold and full of yourself statement. More than likely, it's one of his demons, though, so you should probably take it seriously. So one of those demons, like Wormwood. So Wormwood is doing all that he can to coerce and tempt the patient into hell. Now, this is during World War II, and during World War II, in particular in England, set in upon an Englishman. So I want to read. I'm going to kind of summarize here. Read some of the summary that has been written up here on chapter 28, because we have become we as people have become so entrenched in the idea that death is the ultimate end of evil, or the ultimate success. That evil's ultimate goal is to have the person die. And that's why, and if you don't believe me, next funeral that you attend, stand by and listen to what people say to the bereaved family. They don't really know what to say because they don't really understand what's happening. You can be around death like a soldier. You can be around death like a doctor, like an EMS serviceman, a pastor, and in all of those ways, we can see death, but we don't understand it. And so people, when they line up to comfort the bereaved, say things to pick them up, to distract them, things like they're in a better place, or he was a good soccer player, he was a good dad, a good son, all of these things that discuss earthly life or something vague towards an afterlife, or stick in the wheelhouse of I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss and things like that. And I'm sure that and they are well meant. I'm not saying that they aren't, but really, you very rarely hear people discuss evil and death being beaten. We rather see death as being the end. A lot of cancer patients and other autoimmune patients just talk about fighting a battle and either winning or that they have beaten cancer, or that cancer has beaten them. I don't like the language either way, to be honest, because I'm going to give away the entire plot here, but I can't leave it hanging out there. The battle isn't yours, and the battle, and certainly cancer doesn't win it when a person dies, or an autoimmune disease does not. When a person dies, that's the battle. The disease has not won the battle. Okay. But we still do think that death, since the wages of sin is death, then death is the ultimate knockout punch of evil. That's just naturally going on in our heads. Christians are given faith to believe otherwise. And I'm going to read some summary here. Remember, who these people are. There's Wormwood, who has the patient. There is Screwtape, who is Wormwood's uncle and senior demon. It's World War II. If you hear the word the enemy, is talking about God. And I think that should be good for now. Wormwood has been sending in gleeful cut. All right. Wormwood has been sending in gleeful war-related reports about the death of men and the destruction of cities. Now, keep that in mind. The death of many men and the destruction of cities during the war. We're going to come back to that in the second section that I have for you. And so Wormwood is really excited about this because he sees his patient seeing dead people and the destruction of cities, and Screwtape chastises him for forgetting that in his immediate enjoyment of human suffering, the main benefit is not to enjoy human suffering from a demonic point of view. The point, instead of rejoicing in the suffering of and this could be applied to COVID, the devil is not rejoicing in COVID. The demons are not rejoicing in COVID-19, at least not the intelligent ones. And what Screwtape says here is, do not get caught up in the immediate enjoyment of human suffering, because that happens. Rather, the main benefit is the chance to corrupt the patient's spiritual life. So you have all of this going on in the peripheral. Don't focus, as the demon, do not focus on what's happening in the peripheral. Focus in on the single Christian and how he views the peripheral. So it's not COVID, it's not the pandemic, it's not the scary stuff out there. Satan's not running amok going, here's some COVID, here's some COVID, here's some COVID. That's not how it works. But how you look at that, how you look at it, does determine a temptation or a eyes of faith. And so Screwtape is reminding Wormwood here to don't get distracted as your patient is distracted by death and destruction. Focus in on the patient and twist it to where he loses hope. Focus in on him, the main benefit, which is the chance to corrupt the patient's spiritual life. Turn off the hope as he views this. You stop viewing it, you get tunnel vision, you turn off his hope, slow and slow. At present, the war effort, the love for his girlfriend, and the concerns for his neighbors. Wait, did I pluralize that? Oh, let me redo that. At present, the war effort, love for his girlfriend, and concerns for his neighbors have focused the patient on the needs of others and has drawn him consciously closer to the enemy. So, his war effort, the love that he has for his girlfriend, and his concern for his fellow neighbors, while Wormwood is celebrating the death and destruction of these cities, and he's not focusing on the patient is actually being drawn closer to the enemy, that is, to God, to Christ, because he loves his neighbor, he loves the woman that has been given to him by God, and the efforts of the war further give him courage, and while It's the bait and switch, but being played on the demon. So Wormwood is writing to Screwtape. Wow, look at all this destruction, and he's not focusing on the patient, and the patient is looking at all this destruction, and his tunnel vision is on that which he loves. The effort of the war, his girl, and his neighbor, which the war effort would be encompassing both of those. Now, here's the part that I was talking about. Screwtape reminds his nephew that humans. Now listen, if you're a writer downer, write this down. Screwtape reminds his nephew that humans regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. That's absolutely true. It is everything that I just explained. I'm going to say it again. Screwtape reminds his nephew, Wormwood, that humans regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. So if you survive, so as long as you survive, you are given bounty. You are blessed. You are the goodest. And yet, if you were to die, then that would be the prime evil. Now that's not to say that person is evil, but that evil has won the day over that person, and the one who survives the longest, it could be seen as the best and the worst of theology, or seen as anointed in only slightly better, probably equally bad theology. But no matter what you think, you are a theologian. You're either a good one or a bad one, but you are a theologian. Atheists being some of the worst theologians, but they're still theologians. And so we all have a worldview, and in that worldview, we all have a theological worldview, even atheists and nihilists and Baptists, and of course Lutherans. And we look at this, and Lutherans would disagree with their mouth, but with their mind would wonder that humans regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. Why? Because we're unsure of what happens after death. If you do not have faith, and you do not have Christ, and you do not have baptism, and you do not have the Lord's Supper, then you do not have the assurance of anything after death. And that assurance relies completely and totally on hope. And the hope is given to us according to the promise. And so it's all related. And we can see glimpses of the afterlife like a veil or like a glass. We can see glimpses of the afterlife in the divine service, and we're going to look at that at the second point. And that's why it's so important that we go to divine service, that we actually participate in the liturgy, because when we participate in the liturgy, we're literally participating in heaven. So those who have gone before us, the church triumphant, the church militant, are not two churches, but are one church. Therefore, by going to the liturgy, going to divine service, hearing the word, being baptized, receiving the Lord's Supper, you are confessing and denying this, that humans regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. because you are participating with the church of heaven when you participate in the liturgy on earth, heaven on earth. Now, with that being said, I'm afraid I'm going to run over on this one. Screwtape reminds his nephew that humans regard death as the prime evil and the survival as the greatest good. Now, on the cross, of course, we see that flipped and then flipped again. Christ's death was not the prime evil. It was the victory over Satan. And then survival as the greatest good, not so much on the cross. And also, resurrection is not survival. Resurrection is life again. And so when we talk about baptism and we talk about those being born through water and the Spirit, that's what we're talking about. A resurrection, not a survival. You're a new person. You're different. You're different than who you were. You're not merely surviving anymore. You are a new person in Christ. So, with that being said, Screwtape reminds his nephew that humans regard death as prime evil and survival as the greatest good because of devilish propaganda. That's why we think that. He cautions Wormwood not to be influenced by these sentiments and values. In fact, he should aim to keep his patient alive. Now think about that. Wormwood should aim to keep his patient alive, not die, because the longer that he's alive, the more opportunity he has to work in his temptations. I'm going to read this again because this summary puts it better than I. In fact, he should aim to keep his patient alive, for time can be the devil's ally. Time can be the devil's ally. Now that is completely true. Time can be the devil's ally. So can situations. Evil, when bad befalls people that we love, when this virus happens, and the longer we the longer that we're trying to get back to normal, and the people who are afraid that this is the new normal and that we're handing over rights and freedoms, which I believe that we are doing some of that. The point is that the longer that this stuff draws out, the longer the war goes on, the longer you have to turn the screws on the patient, on us. How true that is. Time can be the devil's ally, but only a certain amount of it. Only a certain amount of it. Because time can only be the devil's ally to where the terrestrial time ends and eternal life begins. Now, Screwtape explains that it is difficult for humans to persevere or carry on in the face of difficulties, obstacles, or, in the words of old brother, where art thou? Every time I see this word, I have to do it. Obstacles or discouragement. As the years pass and the patient enters middle age, the extended monotony of either a troubled life or a prosperous life can wear out the human soul. So as he enters into middle age, and believe me, this is true. You look back and you think, everything that I've done, was it worth it? Was it prosperous, or did I make bad decisions? Now that I'm in middle age and it's the monotony of everyday life, all of the rhetoric of you can be anything you want to be, shoot for the stars and land on the moon, and then you enter into middle age, and even if you landed your dream job, It wasn't. It's not what you thought that it would be. Um, and and especially in the day-to-day activity. But that day-to-day activity and the monotony of it, and the looking at the past of it, and looking and having little inspiration for the future, that can be the devil's ally. In the young, this is good. In the young, the same attachment is more difficult to develop than it is for the old or for the middle-aged. The best tactic is to convince him that the earth can be turned into heaven by politics or eugenics or science or psychology. You hear that? Convince the young that the earth can be turned into heaven by politics or eugenics or science or psychology. A stronger attachment to the earth takes time. Its corruption should be characterized as good sense or maturity or experience. If you are mature, if you are experienced, if you have good sense, then you'll leave the fairy tale of faith behind the longer you are. However, the young, you have to you must convince them to get into politics, eugenics, science, or psychology. And I use science in the not in the scientific method sense, but in the word where you throw it around. Well, that's science, so I win the argument. That's what I'm from. Okay. The falseness of this perception was once nearly revealed by a great human philosopher who once said, "Experience is the mother of illusion," when describing its effects on virtue, but its wisdom has been rendered harmless to the devil by fashion and the historical point of view. In other words, Screwtape concludes that the enemy values time and allows the majority of the human race very little of it. Man, this is so good. Screwtape concludes that God, Christ, values time, but allows the majority of the human race very little of it. He wants only a few to have had the experience of resisting temptation for 60 or 70 or 80 years. He doesn't want everyone to resist temptation for 60 or 70 or 80 years. Screwtape concludes that, I'm going to read it again because it's worth it. Screwtape concludes that the enemy values time and allows the majority of the human race very little of it. He wants only a very few to have had experience of resisting temptation for 60 or 70 years. Therefore, Wormwood must make good use of whatever time his patient has and try to keep him safe. And so now we've got this flip-flop where the demon is keeping the patients, wanting to keep the patients safe and away from the dead bodies and the destruction, in order lest he may die and then go to heaven and the demon lose. So keep them alive and slowly turn the screws until they wear down. But God gives little time to humans on earth and everlasting life after. So truly what I said here regarding death as the primeval and survival as the greatest good is actually flip-flopped. It's the opposite. And remember, I talked about the liturgy and heaven on earth. Here's the second thing I was telling you about. Revelation chapter 20. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into a pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer, until 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom authority to judge was committed. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus, for the word of God, those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but will be the priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years are ended, and here we go, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations. He will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them from battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth to surround the camp of the saints in the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed him. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophets were. And they will be tormented night and day forever and ever. Verse 11. Then I saw a white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. The books were opened. Then another book was opened, which was the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in it. And they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. If anyone's name was not found written in the Lamb's book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for former things have passed away. And he who is seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. Also he said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have his heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for the murderers, the sexual immoral, the sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. In that we see that time passes away. Death is not the fulfillment of evil. We do not regard, Christians do not regard death as the prime evil and survival as the greatest good. The Christian finds the greatest good in the death of Christ. Therefore, we find the victory in the cross, and we find heaven and earth in the liturgy, in the divine service, where we sing with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven. When our dead die, we bring them to the church and we bury them in holy land. When we bring infants into the world, which that's how they all typically start. I was going to say people. When we bring people into the world, we bring them to the font. We bring them to the church to be baptized. And who witnesses that? The angels, the archangels, and all the company of heaven, the church militant. And all of that is in time and is in space, and God is gracious to those whom He gives little time. For others, He allows them to resist temptation for 60, 70, 80 years. However, death is not the final thing. A new heaven and a new earth shall come. And when you read this, when you hear what I read, then I saw a great white throne, to Him who was seated on it. From His presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. It's exactly how I see Augustana Lutheran Church and how I see the church. When we enter into the church, heaven and earth flee away from it. The presence of earth and sky are gone. And the dead, we, great and small, stand before the throne, the altar, and we take and we eat of the flesh of the Lamb. We are baptized into the water. We drink His blood. And the dead are made alive through the waters of holy baptism. And their names are written in the book of life. And in the book of life, there is no time stamp. There is no chronology in the book of life. Because long after I'm dead, long after the internet's dead, long after we're all dead, we become the company of heaven. And this day will come, the judgment, where Christ judges the living and the dead. And He will look upon us, we the dead, and those who are dead in the sea and dead in the ground, and the dead in hell, and He will judge them. And those whose name are written in the book of life, He gives life eternal. He will be their God, and we will be His people. Because all of this is said after He throws all of those into Hades, and He says, "Behold, I am making all things new." Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And He says, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give water from the spring of the water of life without payment. And the one who conquers will have his inheritance. And I will be his God, and he will be my son." Notice that language. The one who conquers will have his heritage. Christ, who conquered sin, death, and the devil, has his heritage, and he gives his heritage unto us, we who are baptized, and brings us with him. And he is our God, and we share in his heritage. in his lineage, in his blood-bought familial gifts. And we will be God's son, God's children. And so we need not fear death or the devil. Does the devil make us do it? Who cares? He loses. Christians win. By grace, through faith, we are justified by Jesus Christ. Does the devil make us do it? Let's not get distracted by the dead bodies and the destroyed cities. Let us tunnel our vision and not let Wormwood, well, he's not so much alive anymore, but let the demon turn the screws. Let your holy angel be with me, that the evil foe may have no power over me. And let's focus on this, the liturgy, heaven on earth, where we get but a glimpse into that glass, through that mirror dimly, but soon we shall see clearly the triumphant land, the New Jerusalem. And we get to see a foretaste of that feast every single Sunday. So my last thing to say, my last plea, if you made it through this entire video, come to church. Go to where heaven is on earth, where his gifts are given. Shake off these demons and dust. Shake off the I don't need to go to church, or we're not church people. Go to where God gives the gifts. Go to church. Time is of the essence. And also, not. Get to church this Sunday.